Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The option tree for off-season transactions continues to shrink, and some interesting comments about what keeps LeBron motivated. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always free, never going to be behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel, Andy, all of whom are probably settled into the reality that the Lakers roster as it's currently constructed is going to be the Lakers roster that they go into camp with and emerge from camp with, because there's just not a lot of options out there. And to wit, Bruce Brown, one of the guys that at least periodically appears on the trade target list, the people the Lakers might be interested in. They've certainly been interested in the past. He just got knee surgery this weekend. He missed the start of training camp. So cross that one off the list.
Yeah, I want to say it was Eric Corrine, who covers the Raptors for The Athletic, who tweeted out on Friday, quote, Bruce Brown had arthroscopic surgery on his right knee on Thursday. No timetable, but he will be evaluated in 3 weeks, depending on the nature of the injury. But these things are often 6 to 8 week things. Doug Smith, who covers the Raptors for the Toronto Star, said, quote, Brown said he had been fighting through knee issues for a couple of months with the Raptors after he was obtained from the Indiana Pacers in a trade featuring Pascal Siakam. Brown and the Raptors had hoped the injury would calm down during the offseason, but it flared up again when he ramped up workouts to be ready for the start of training camp. Instead of trying to work through it under the stress of camp practices, the decision to have the scope now should lessen the length of his absence. The Raptors hope he'll be back on the court before the end of the month-long preseason and won't miss much of the regular season that begins October 23rd. We're doing perhaps a lot of work. The Raptors hope not. Maybe the Lakers hope not much in terms of much of the regular season.
I mean, I don't know exactly how. I mean, Bruce Brown makes about 20. Is that what we're on?
He makes like 23 mil. It's a very D'Lo friendly salary. You know, you could look at a potential trade of like D'Lo, either Jalen Hood-Schifino or Cam Reddish or Christian Wood,
depending on smaller salaried fellows.
Right, depending on what the Raptors are looking for. Who the Raptors would look for in filler or accept in filler could potentially affect whatever draft compensation would be attached to that, seconds versus firsts, all that sort of stuff. But it is one of those things that could theoretically be workable involving D'Lo, because the Raptors would not have to commit very long to him. And also, too, there is some speculation that while nobody expects the Raptors to be contenders this year or anywhere close, that they're not necessarily looking to tank this season. Right. After bringing in RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes really came into his own last season. Like, this is not a team that I think is looking, at least not right now, to get into the flag sweepstakes, so to speak.
They're both they're in that group of teams that is too good for that. Like, without. They're going to win enough games with the players that they have that they can't give themselves great odds without just, guys get hurt, things start to happen. It's different. But excuse me, like, without bad things happening, the Raptors aren't a great team, but they're too good to, compete with some of the dregs of NBA society.
It's also a Rui salary too, by the way, just to note that as well.
It could be Rui, it could be Bruce Brown. I mean, like, there are options here. And both teams would be trading for a guy that, you could be rid of at the end of the season. He's an interesting category just because with most players that we talk about, if you're interested in Zach LaVine, you're going to have to trade a lot of depth to get LaVine. You can't just trade one guy. You need multiple guys just to make the money work. And, there are players like that around where it's not just, is player X better than Rui Hachimura or better than D'Angelo Russell? It's, are they better than these three members of your rotation? And oftentimes, the trades and the constructions that I've seen, for really anybody that's been kicked around, the answer is no. And, Brown is an interesting one because a couple years ago, after his season with Denver, he's been on the Lakers' radar for a little while, but like that season in Denver put him way high up there. He ends up going to Indiana.
Lakers pass in the playoffs. If you can't beat them, win them.
Exactly. Well, that's how we do it. But he goes to Indiana on I think a contract that was surprising to people, and just that he got, I think it was $45 million or something like that. And so, but he is in that category of players that you don't have to give up multiple rotation players to get. The issue there is, though, he wasn't great last year. And so, is Brown somebody who will really instantly make them better? He can guard players that, like, for example, D'Angelo Russell can't.
Or Rui can't.
Or Rui can't. Right, sure. But what he won't do is spread the floor like either one of those guys can. And so, you give up a little bit of there. Like, you're not going to turn the ball over to Bruce Brown and have him create offensively and, have him step in and be one of your secondary scorers and stuff like that. We're talking about guys who averaged 9 points a game for his career.
Well, he can be like a secondary or third playmaking option. He can provide you a little bit of scoring at times.
He's a good player. He's good at a lot of things.
Right. He's arguably not great at anything other than I think maybe at his best defensively or his absolute best as a playmaker. There's nothing that he's really a standout at.
Right.
He's just good at a fair amount of things.
I mean, and it's funny, like you talked about, at the top of the show, like, you want to be able to see guys get on the floor before you trade for them. Like, I personally would not play my trade chip or a trade chip or something like that for a guy before you see a player coming off of surgery get back on the floor and make sure that he's healthy. But the other thing about this that I think is interesting in the context that you're saying is, I'm not sure if I'm the Lakers, if I want to make a trade in the first month or two or whatever of the season. I don't want to make a trade. I mean, obviously, if something really great comes along between now and training camp, sure. But at this point, I think when you only have one big swing left to take, I think you need to do it with more complete information than the Lakers currently have. You need to know exactly what it is that you need, where you are deficient. And I realize they're running back the same team as they did last year, but they're not going to run it back in the same way. Hopefully, Redick is going to do things differently than Darvin Ham did. He's going to ask players to do things in a different way. He's going to have different requirements of them. The defense is going to look different. The schemes are going to look different. And so you got to find out who fits in where and where your holes are before I think you can start trying to fill them. I don't think they know what their holes are yet, because I don't think they totally know what the team is. And again, you hope somebody like Jared Vanderbilt is back reasonably soon, or maybe doesn't even miss any time, depending on what things look like going into camp. At this point, I think they're better off seeing what they have, unless something just fantastic comes along, and that's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, to reiterate the point you made about the guy, you can't trade for a guy being injured. Like, putting aside other reservations I have about bringing in Zach LaVine, whether it be worth it, all that stuff, there's no way in hell you're going to trade for that guy without seeing him actually play. Like, I'm not saying that the Bulls front office and medical staff is that they're lying when they say that Zach LaVine has been medically cleared. I will say they're biased. Like, I don't think they care what happens to LaVine once he gets moved. So, yeah, to that point, whether you're talking about LaVine, Bruce Brown, or other guys around the league, between the ones that you need to see be on the court and then somebody like Jonas Valanciunas, who you can't trade for until mid-December anyway, the Lakers' options really do start to dwindle. The way you're framing this, though, is interesting. The idea of wanting to see what they have right now before making any type of moves, whether you mean at this point in the season or just period, in a roundabout way, even if it wasn't your intention, you're kind of making the case for them not having done anything particularly big during the offseason.
That I'll explain why I don't think that's the case, but we'll get to that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can enjoy this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So whenever you get a hunch in the middle of a game, I got kind of an idea where this thing's going, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much else on the same page when you place your bet. And FanDuel, this is what they'll do for you. You get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Plus, as we are getting closer, as we're talking about, to the 24-25 NBA season kicking off, our friends at FanDuel have options for you there as well. As of this recording, the Lakers are 35-1 to win the title. Anthony Davis 150-1 for MVP. LeBron 200-1. Anthony Davis is also 25-1 for Defensive Player of the Year. Dalton Knecht 10-1 for Rookie of the Year. Max Christie 150-1 for Most Improved Player. That's FanDuel.com.
So here's what I mean. I think, obviously both of us agree you don't ever want the Lakers, to be doing moves for the sake of making moves. And part of, nothing has come along this offseason. And granted, again, I don't know what they said no to. I don't know what trades. It's been a relatively quiet offseason around the NBA generally. But, I don't know what has been put on the Lakers' plate that they said no to. That to me is even bigger than this guy went here, this guy went there, this sign and trade happened or whatever, and the Lakers were involved and quote unquote couldn't get the deal done. Well, again, I need to know what they said no to before I can be super critical. But I think when you think about improvement, a lot of what we've talked about with the Lakers is, DeJounte Murray, for example, would be a great guy to add to what they have, to take that and put him, instead of, I want to give up Austin Reeves or Russell or those guys. It's you want to import talent to play with someone like that. And where I think I certainly wouldn't argue the Lakers shouldn't have tried to improve themselves or couldn't have tried to improve themselves. But you're right. There's an element with trades where you're subtracting multiple players and bringing in a guy of speculating on what your holes are going to be and maybe not realizing what holes you're creating when you trade away certain players. I think what we all hoped they would do is use an exception, bring in a veterans minimum guy, have a little bit of flexibility to add to the roster that they had, even anticipating that big blockbuster trades weren't going to be easy to do. So I think that's the distinction I would make with what you're saying. I'm not advocating for them not to have made trades or made moves. Obviously, something seems like a really good opportunity. You have to take advantage of it. But I think what really a lot of people hope they would do is just add to what they had, try to fill some holes with a 3-and-D wing or a backup center or stuff like that. A lot of stuff that wouldn't necessarily be acquired through a trade.
I don't know how they would have done it without a trade. I think at the beginning of the offseason, people assumed they would also be able to try to sign a free agent here or there, that they would have the space. I don't think everybody was necessarily anticipating all of their players opting in, for example, and having no roster space to go out and sign anyone, to use an exception, to use anything like that. I think that part of it, even to use a veterans minimum on someone, going into the offseason, you thought going into the offseason they wouldn't sign a single free agent? No, not necessarily, but I didn't. We talked a lot heading into free agency that we did not think the Lakers were going to be players because we knew that they wouldn't have space to do anything of significance you cannot count on veterans minimum guys to be available at a caliber that would actually make much of a significant difference.
Moving.
We thought they would have so let me finish. We thought they would have a taxpayer mid-level at best, and most impactful players are not available at $5-ish million.
No, so but you can still get somebody that fills a hole, is my point. Is like you have a couple roster spots, and even if it's not veterans minimum guys that are like, oh my God, like what a phenomenal signing at that level. You still have on a typical off season, you're filling in a backup center, or you could fill in a guy who can come in and play a little wing. Like, I think those are just like the normal in a normal off season. Even if you're not players for the big guys out there, I agree with you. There was very little like DeMar DeRozan talk. Like that was fun, but like there was no.
Well, there was a lot of it. It just wasn't realistic. But I mean, there was plenty of it. We did shows about it.
Right.
I mean,
pointing that out. But like again, but it's a guy, a player or two at the veterans minimum, or a taxpayer mid-level or something like that are minor trades that are working on the periphery or something like that are still things that you do sort of in a typical offseason that happen.
Those are multifaceted things that could have happened. You initially phrased it through free agency, and what I'm saying is heading into free agency, no, I didn't think that they would do much of anything because it was pretty obvious from the outset they weren't going to have many available paths to do anything. So no, I really didn't. If you're asking me if I thought the offseason would conclude with no additions of any kind, whether you're talking about veterans minimums, trades, or whatever, other than like, for all intents and purposes, Dalton Connect, like it would be that extreme. No, I didn't predict that.
Then that's essentially what I'm getting at. It's like even those marginal things didn't happen.
Sure, but I mean, once it became clear that like all of their veterans minimum guys were going to be opting in, D'Lo was going to be opting in, we spent a lot of time telling our listeners and our viewers, don't expect much action. Whether we predicted action on a scale of 1 to 10 at a 3 or a 0, we were pretty clear. Don't expect much more than a 3.
Right, and we explained too why it's not even clearing space. Dumping Cam Reddish, dumping Jackson Hayes or something like that is not as easy as it sounds, and it comes with a higher cost than I think a lot of fans anticipate. But I guess it's just like when in this process, where are you looking? But like when the Lakers season ended, my assumption would be that the roster wouldn't be one rookie basically different and a minus Taurean Prince than it was last season. I thought they'd have a little bit more. I just think unless like Bruce Brown is a good player, but if you're giving up an important rotation piece, he's not so good that you can plug him in and be like, this guy is going to make a difference, as if the other player that you're removing doesn't have an impact.
Here's where I would disagree, specifically with Bruce Brown, and also specifically with the two guys most likely to be the centerpiece of a theoretical trade for him, which is either D'Lo or Rui.
Uh-huh.
Whoever you think the best player between those three guys are, Bruce Brown does certain things that neither Rui nor D'Lo does.
I agree.
That the roster is also more lacking in than the stuff that D'Lo and Rui do well. So
let's just forget the periphery stuff. Well, man, I'll ask. We can start. We have a little time here, but like, would you trade? Just let's say straight up, filler is unimportant in terms of. Would you just trade Rui for Bruce Brown straight up?
I would seriously consider it. I would give it real thought.
Yeah.
Just because I think I'm a big fan of Rui, and I'm a big proponent of what I think he can bring to the team. But what I think he does bring to the team in a lot of ways doubles and triples down on what they already do well, which, to be clear, can sometimes make them a hell of a team to contend with.
Uh-huh.
But this roster is in a lot of ways very lopsided towards offense. You can make an argue in today's NBA that might be the way to be. But if you are looking to find any sort of balance for what they don't have, maybe things change and look different once Christie starts getting regular minutes. Gabe Vincent, knock on wood, is healthy and playing at the level that they expected. Things like, Austin Reeves maybe gets his defense somewhere closer to where it looked in his rookie season. Things like that, then maybe all of a sudden what Bruce Brown brings to the table doesn't seem as, in such shortage of it, such short supply. But yeah, I think you can make an argument that Bruce Brown, even if he isn't as good at anything he does as Rui's strengths, he does do something that the team may need more than what Rui provides.
Let's talk a little bit more about this, because what I find interesting about those two guys in particular, Rui and D'Lo, in this kind of scenario is the trade-offs with each of those guys. So I think what you're saying is interesting and certainly defensible. But I want to walk through some of the trade-offs because I find them interesting. We'll do that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, or all of the above, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
Look, I admit that a lot of this is me thinking on the fly about Brown, because I had sort of forgotten about him as a trade option. Just, it's not like it's been like a really active will they or won't they all off season long, but he's another name that's in the hopper, so to speak. The trade-offs here are really interesting, because if you trade Rui, you are, it's an interesting backload, like an Austin Reeves, Bruce Brown backcourt is interesting. Maybe you go really small and you can play could you play like D'Lo with both of those guys? You're certainly trading a lot of size for, better perimeter defense than Rui provides you. You're sacrificing some shooting, no question about that.
You're gaining a bit of playmaking, though. I mean,
a little bit.
Bruce,
I don't.
Dude, Bruce Brown is prime Magic Johnson compared to Rui.
Well, just because he's a guard, but I don't think he
passes at all.
Right, but sure. But my point is, compared to other guards that you would have on the floor, he is a lesser playmaker, I think, than Reeves. He's a lesser playmaker than D'Lo. In terms of guys who are
talking about what you gain in the exchange
a little bit
is more playmaking.
But I wonder about the floor combinations, and so you don't have a lot of, depending on Vanderbilt's health, and certainly Wood is a wild card in this. You're trading away from a position where you don't have a lot of dudes to add to a place where you have more. D'Lo, if you included that there, you keep the front court there with Rui. You are obviously giving up the playmaking, and you're giving up shooting, and you are relying on Austin Reeves at that point to be more of a classic floor organizer and stuff like that. Stuff that he wasn't as good at last year. Obviously, you have point LeBron and you have all that other stuff, and then you're also really relying on Gabe Vincent. To play a lot of high quality minutes. And I'm still a little suspicious there. Maybe I overvalue D'Lo's floor spacing, but it's an interesting, like I said,
well, we talked more
about primary backcourt of Austin Reeves and Bruce Brown is interesting to me. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I like D'Lo, but that's the defense that you pick up here for a guy like Brown is, some of the positional versatility, his ability to guard multiple positions. I agree with you. You got to think about it. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, we also talked about this more, at least from the outset, when you first proposed it to me. You asked, would I trade Rui for Bruce Brown?
Well, now the other option is D'Lo. So we talked through Rui.
Right.
The trade, the other option is D'Lo.
I would be a bit more reluctant about D'Lo than Rui because D'Lo is a better player than Rui, but also if you trade D'Lo, then as you said, Austin Reeves really has to be up for, more responsibilities that if he isn't ready for, you're kind of screwed. Bruce Brown can replicate, if nothing else, he improves the defense that you had or you didn't have with Rui. And he does enough on the offensive end that I think he can just grease the wheels. And if you've got D'Lo, Austin, LeBron, and AD out there as a starting five, assuming it wasn't Jared Vanderbilt starting or whatever, Bruce Brown can help keep, like the trains running, so to speak, in certain ways, especially if D'Lo's still on the team. Those offensive responsibilities aren't going to be on as heavily for Bruce Brown or Reeves. If D'Lo goes,
you have a lot of players. You have a lot of players to figure out who's going to play and when. But I agree with you; it sort of makes more sense. It's just one of those things where, it's easier to give Brown 25 to 30 minutes a game if D'Lo's not there. So, if he is, who are you opening up? Where do you open up the space? Does that mean that Christie's going to play less? Probably a little bit. And where do you slide Vincent in? What's your start? You bringing D'Lo off the bench at that point? You bringing Brown in off the bench at that? You add it. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying,
I consider Brown
there is really what you understand what I'm getting at. It's tricky with either guy.
I consider. I mean, we're going pretty far down the rabbit hole for somebody that isn't going to end up a Laker for the next at least 2-ish months.
But I think we're arguing. It's not. We're not arguing. It's a discussion that's less about the specific players you're, but that concept of when you make a trade. What are the trade-offs? What do you with a player who's not a superstar where it's it doesn't matter what it's Kevin Durant. Okay. With a guy like Bruce Brown who has real strengths and real deficiencies, where you can fit him in and who he fits in next to is really important. And so
I think to just to
lower level play trades are hard to talk about.
Just to answer your question, I think what makes Bruce Brown pliable in terms of figuring out those combinations is just the ability to guard up and guard down. So you can find places to put him where he can fit a role defensively. And then I think you figure out the combinations around him offensively, knowing that he can bring something to the table offensively, even if he's not going to be a standout there. But for example, I don't automatically see him taking away minutes from Max, for example, because I think he has more of an ability to certainly guard up, maybe guard down, but definitely up than at least we've seen from Max so far. He's definitely, I think, going to have more ability to guard up than Gabe Vincent. So you can just sort of find some of those possibilities, I think, along the defensive side. Then you just figure out the rest of the questions.
Yeah, it's just this is the part that that I think is just interesting about it. It's when these mid-level trades, when you're talking about players with flaws, where you open up the space for him. And it's to get back to the point that you'd made about DeJounte Murray, it's the ideal thing to do is to trade for a player like Murray to play with D'Angelo Russell and these other guys or whatever, and make the Lakers better that way. That obviously wasn't an option. The best thing for the Lakers would be add a player. This is why having no superfluous salaries on your roster is hard, because you can't make a trade like that with an expendable player to bring in somebody who can help you in ways that Brown or a Brown-like player could, because of the way the roster is constructed and the salaries are constructed on the team right now.
They could use Russell Westbrook's contract right now, in all honesty, like for what they are looking to do at this moment. Before it was just get rid of Russ, and we don't, they obviously care who comes back, but that's the number one goal in this particular scenario. As far as we actually want to soup up the team and we feel like we have an idea of what it is, they could really use that expiring $43 million that's totally expendable.
Yeah, well, so in the end, one of the reasons that I hope that the team is healthy beyond that it'll help them win games is just this notion of they need real information going into December, January, February before they make any deals. They need as much data, they need as much understanding, because I'm sure Redick has an idea of what he thinks he wants to do and how he wants to use guys. But I mean, you would agree that a lot of what he thinks he wants to do, he's going to have to reform based on what it actually looks like when players are out on the court doing it.
I mean, of course, but that's the same with any new coach or,
Sure. No, yeah. It's not a criticism.
No, I know it's not a criticism. I'm just saying this would happen regardless of whether they made a trade in the next week or if they did nothing over the offseason. Like, and especially in a case of someone like Redick, who is truly an unknown in what he's going to implement and how. Like, I think that was going to be the case regardless. But if I can have something of a vision of how these guys fit together, at the risk of being too self-deprecating, if I can come up with some visions, I'm pretty sure Redick can.
Oh, I'm sure he's got some ideas. I just think at this point, if there is a silver lining to the total lack of movement for the offseason, is it will, at this point, the Lakers can actually take some time to get data on what they have and what it looks like, and really understand what the holes are, because they'll look different than they were last year. So quick Christian Koloko update, not yet cleared. He's seems
by the NBA.
By the NBA.
Right. He was stopped by TMZ, I'm assuming at an airport, because that's where TMZ, unless it's at a club, which this clearly was not, unless it was the most antiseptic, boring club ever. This was an airport. TMZ stopped him, which, first of all, hey, pays to be a Laker. All of a sudden, Christian Koloko, people are paying attention to
TMZ worthy.
But he said that his doctors have cleared him. He feels really good. This is NBA red tape getting that clearance, but he sounded pretty confident that he was going to get it, and he sounded very excited to be, in the position to have this opportunity with the Lakers.
So let's hope they get that done quickly. Get that man into a cardiologist or whatever it is, an NBA approved cardiologist ASAP. We will get to this LeBron stuff tomorrow and into the week. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers. Leave us questions, leave us comments, both about Bruce Brown and the conceptual Bruce Brown, players like that. Who are you looking? What skills do you think the Lakers will need? Which ones are you willing to sacrifice in trying to get some of those skills? Do make Locked On the NBA podcast your second podcast of the day, your second listen. Great way to keep up on what's going around around the league. Local experts, all that stuff. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See everyone tomorrow.